5 common mistakes Vanguard players make. There will be some situations where these mistakes will cost you the game, especially in the close ones. Luckily, they are easy to fix. Mistake number 1 is missing opportunities in losing situations. There are turns where you have all the information you need to gauge whether or not you are about to lose. You can capitalize on this by thinking of your outs instead of just blindly guarding all your opponent's attacks until you can't guard them anymore. In this example, it's Leonard's turn, and looking at the Shiranui player's hand, it's not gonna be enough to guard a full Vivace turn since with Resonance Dragon, it's going to be 7 attacks including 1 big Vanguard swing. So the only out here is getting a 6 damage heal or an over trigger. But if you just blindly guard all the attacks until you can't guard anymore, even a 6 damage heal won't be able to save you. The drive checks will be dry just to show the example more easier. As you can see, you won't be able to guard the last attack. But in the next clip, I'm going to show you everything's the same triggers, same drive check, same hand. But we're going to take the heal trigger on the first attack. Taking the heal trigger early is big since you'll be saving 10,000 shield for every attack you're gonna guard. But obviously in some scenarios, you have to choose which attack to take since it also depends on the board, depends on your opponent's deck, and depends on your hand. But in this scenario, taking the first attack is fine since Leonard's attacks are not as big. So taking the heal allows the Shiranui player to survive and go to his next turn. Second mistake is not optimizing attack patterns. I'll be giving 2 general rules that you can apply in most situations. The first one is to start with smaller attacks whenever your opponent can afford to take damage. This lowers the risk of your other attacks not being big enough to hit your opponent's units. This also potentially maximizes the amount of shield you require your opponent to guard. For this example, we decided to use the new start text to make it more simpler. So in the first clip, we decided to boost on the first attack of our grade 2. But our opponent gets a defensive, which is the Stoicheia deck. And Astrom's skill is you can withstand a rear guard, and both Astrom and that unit gets plus 5,000 power. So since our opponent got a defensive and we boosted with the grade 1 on our first attack, the grade 2 will now not hit over the defensive unless we get a trigger. But in this example, we decided to make the drive checks dry. And in the next clip, now our grade 2 will attack without boost for the first attack. And when restood by Astrom's skill, it can now hit over the defensive since you saved the boost for the last attack. So this is a simple demonstration. The second rule is for more specific situations. For this one, you have to think more, like taking into account the available information, and knowing your opponent's hand helps greatly with this. In most cases, when you only have 2 attacks left and your opponent cannot take any more damage, you attack with the larger column first. This is to prevent your opponents from maximizing their effect perfect guards. For this example, it's Lutetia's turn, and you just swung with Vanguard, so you only have 2 attacks left. You have a weaker column, which is the Lutetia column with the grade 2 with boost, and a larger column which is the Nostria with Eureka. If you attack with Lutetia first, the attack is low enough for the Shiranui player to be able to guard it with the triggers in hand. The Shiranui can guard with the effect perfect guard since you don't have to discard if you have 1 or less cards in hand. And then in the next clip, if you decided to attack with Nostria, which is a larger column, so that's 35, 43, 48. The 2 triggers, even with the intercept, is not enough to guard it. So it forces the opponent to perfect guard, and the Shiranui player won't be able to have enough shield to guard the next attack. Third mistake is missing out on securing wins. There are situations where you know you're about to win unless your opponent gets a heal or over trigger. One way of preventing this is if you have a unit with an extra critical, you attack with that unit first. Or if you don't and you're confident that your opponent's not enough to guard your attacks, you can swing with your Vanguard first to get a chance to get a critical trigger. In this way, your opponent has to take 2 instead of 1, so a 6 damage shield won't be able to save. So in this example, in the first clip, attacking with the column that doesn't have a crit, an extra crit, allows the Cristiano player to live. But in the next clip, attacking with the column with the critical trigger first requires the Cristiano to get 2 heal triggers instead of 1. Fourth mistake is inefficient guarding. Of course, there are some situations you really have to think for a long time to guard optimally, but in the example I'm going to show you, it's gonna be very basic and you can see it in a lot of games. So you have 2 attacks with the same amount of power, and in this first clip, the Stoicheia player will guard the first attack and then take the second, which, because of that, the Stoicheia player won't be able to get the value out of the defensive trigger or the potential defensive trigger. And in the second clip, if you take the first attack and you get a defensive trigger, you only need to guard with 5000 shield instead of 15. So you get the value from the defensive trigger. The last mistake is not reading cards. I saved this one for last since it's the most common and everyone already knows this. It's easy to fix, you just read cards. There's nothing wrong with reading your or your opponent's cards to double check, especially if you're against a deck you have limited knowledge about. It could save you from a guard restrict or just a simple difference in wording, like when an ability is required or optional. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.